This is a presentation by Professor Tom Rose at the Palm Harbor Library on the 15th of February, 2014.
Now, I became interested in this whole issue of where Palm Harbor was when I did the research for this book on Indian Bluff Island. And one of the main things about this area before World War II, there was absolutely no infrastructure and planning. And if you've had a chance to read the handout, which is still being revised, then you'll see that in this part of Pinellas County, in northern Pinellas County, we really didn't get any infrastructure in terms of roads, public sewers, public water, until 1973 when the county developed a comprehensive plan. So partly what we're going to be emphasizing today is the period between really after World War II up through 1973. So it just gives you an idea of what things look like, and I'm going to do this very quickly. The yellow is the more developed area. So you can see St. Petersburg, Largo, Clearwater, and then there's just nothing up near the top. And it just goes through the years, and it just shows you how rural it was. And a lot of people don't understand that now. After 1951, you see that it began to change. And we're going to come back to this period. And then it changed a lot. It's more like what it is today. Except still, in 1990, everything on the east side of Lake Tarpon was not developed. That's when it started to develop. This is what was called Lake Butler, and it's no longer Lake Butler. It's Lake Tarpon. This is a very interesting map produced by the county, but you really can't tell where people are living, except you can see these slash lines here, and that's the center of population. And then if you go up here, you see Dunedin, and then when you're getting up here, I'm not sure what that is. But you get up to Crystal Beach, and in 1932 there was almost nothing in Crystal Beach. There were a few houses and there were 2 hotels. And then you get up to Wall Springs, there were about 40 houses in Wall Springs. And then this is getting up to Tarpon Springs, and we don't go that far. This presentation only goes as far as Klosterman, because Klosterman is the line between Tarpon Springs. Tarpon Springs is north and Palm Harbor south of Klosterman. So sometimes when you're thinking about it, Palm Harbor is between Klosterman to the north and Curlew Road or Curlew Creek to the south. Now this is a 1943 map, which was done by the U.S. Geological Survey. They flew over in airplanes, and it's sometimes, this is Curlew Road, and you can see it because of the bump of Curlew Creek. And at Palm Harbor goes, well, it goes over to here because it goes beyond the lake. Part of the difficulty of dealing with these maps was that every single map we had was a county-wide map, except for this one. And so they all had to be photographed. And the students who worked with me had to photograph all these maps. And this is off here because we had to use 3 different geological survey maps to get the whole picture. So you can see in 1943 there's a little development up here, but there's almost no development. There are very, very few people here, and it's very rural in 1943. Now these maps are the kind of maps that you got free at your bank, at the Chamber of Commerce. They got handed out free. AAA did not have any of these maps until quite a bit later. because AAA nationally had maps, but they didn't have local maps because the local AAAs did the local maps, and they were never connected in with the national map. So if you drove from Omaha to or any state to Florida in those days, it would get you to Palm Harbor or to Clearwater, but then there were no maps, and they weren't connected in, even though you had a triptych. Like our family drove across the country in 1952. We had a triptych, but it didn't. It would just get you basically into the area where you were going, and that's all it did. But you can. This map, none of these maps are dated, and this map was made by Mr. Gaston in I thought Clearwater, Dunedin, and he has disappeared off the map. We can't find any of his relatives. And he said about the maps that he did, they were never to scale. So this is somewhere late 50s, early 60s, and so you see the streets all laid out in Crystal Beach and in Ozona, but that doesn't mean there are houses on all those streets. There were many more streets in Palm Harbor, but most of them were not developed. They were platted, but there were just trees and woods around. There weren't houses. And you see at this time you get Indian Bluff Island, and this is interesting because there's a little inlet here, and there were actually two inlets. And so when this was done, the second inlet hadn't been done. Now there are two inlets. Now this is a little bit later map, and it's not made by Mr. Gaston, it's made by somebody else. So you can see a lot more development in Palm Harbor. It just all of a sudden jumps. What happened originally, through the war, they built basically one house at a time in Crystal Beach, Palm Harbor, Ozona, and then the subdivisions didn't come until the mid-50s. The first subdivisions, which was a very important discovery for me, were the subdivisions along the Gulf of Mexico and Lake Tarpon. And they were all built by something called dredge and fill. The developers were very greedy, and they wanted to get as many waterfront lots as they could, so they just took swamps and filled them in and made canals, so there were more waterfront houses. But if you study these carefully, you just see all this white stuff. I mean, you see Innisbrook, it's not built yet. You're seeing the developments, which we'll talk about a little bit later, along Lake Tarpon, and you'll see Baywood Village at Klosterman, what started in the late 50s. All these subdivisions came in the late 50s. Now there was a problem, because they had the subdivisions, but they hadn't thought about sewer and water. So we're getting to a pretty big problem, which is you build these subdivisions, and you build them with septic tanks and wells, and then the septic tanks and wells fail. And the county, the main sewer treatment plant was not built until the early 70s. So a lot of these, you'd see one of these developments, you wanted to buy a lot. The only trouble is you couldn't build it because you couldn't get a permit for a septic tank, and they were overflowing all over. So this is just another one. This happens to be another Gadsden map from the mid-50s, and it's a little more developed, but just look at all this white. I mean, this was all orange groves. Everywhere that was white was orange groves. This is the AAA map, and see, the AAA map was a little better down here in Palm Harbor, had some more streets on it. But look here, all orange groves. Or, depending on when this came, there were more developments, but AAA didn't put them in there. This is the way I got these maps, and maybe some of you would donate more of them to the Historical Society. is I just kept asking people, and I got some at yard sales, and there's a bookstore in St. Petersburg that sells old maps, and I got some there. They're very hard to find. And you might wonder, what about, were there maps before 1950? No, because there weren't hardly any people. You didn't need a map. You know, if you were going to see somebody in Crystal Beach, you didn't need a map to get there. So these maps didn't come until later. So this map is a little confusing because you get the Girl Scout camp, and of course you always see the railroad coming through. And that came in 1887. The railroad came in 1887, and the main purpose of the railroad was really to get the oranges north. The other purpose of the railroad was for people who, for wealthy people from the north to come to the expensive hotels and then some of the less expensive hotels. And we'll talk about that later. And that's a map that we had to piece together again, because it's not, you know, it folded up in a way that it didn't hook together. So you remember, you'd be driving along, you're trying to hook these two maps together without having an accident. This is another map, probably from the early 70s, and now you see how much more developed it is. There's still all this white space, which is orange groves. There's part of Innisbrook is developed, but not all of it. But it wasn't until after 73 that you really had public water and public sewer. So, I mean, I find this is a great way of understanding how things developed around here, because you can see the maps. You can actually look at the maps. Now we get to a whole nother era that I want to walk through with you. This is the 50s of the development. So this is Bay Woods Associates. This is the corner of Klosterman and the Dixie Highway, all the way to the Gulf. And there's some great pictures. These are the original brochures that were handed out by the Realty Company. This guy came from Michigan. He also developed something in Dunedin, I think, called Dunedin Shores. He'd done that before. And there were 750 lots in here, way too many. And this had its own septic system or sewage treatment plant on the McMullen Booth property next door. And they think the pipe that took the sewage away is still under the channel. So we just hope it doesn't break or rust. This just is more about the layout of Baywood Village. You know, and he's telling you all the great... See, he says it has sanitary services, and there was a community water plant, as there was in Crystal Beach. But we still didn't have anything public. The guy's name was Heenan, who developed it, and he had an office on site, and he also had an office in Cleveland or Detroit, I can't remember which. But you can see a lot of the sections were not even developed. The first section was here. This is the Grand Canal coming in here. The McMullen property is over here, as far as I know. But you're going to see some wonderful photographs in a minute that somebody had saved. Now this photograph, it's not the 50s. That's wrong. But I'm going to go to the next one. Now this is the great photograph. So this is probably taken from an airplane or a tower. Looking, this is, I think, you know, Sal, I think this is the Grand Canal coming in here. And this is the McMullen property. And this is looking out across the Gulf. And the next one you're going to see is going the other direction. It's looking over to Lake Tarpon. So here you are. This is the very beginnings of developing Bay Woods. And why was it called Bay Woods? Well, the person who's lived here the longest, it was just a bunch of woods around. I mean, that's why it was Bay Woods. And they cut down a lot of the trees. And it's looking across to Lake Tarpon, and what's in between? Nothing but orange groves. Just orange groves everywhere. And this picture kind of really explains where we came from. And Now, what was in Bay Woods before it was Bay Woods? Well, it was pretty marshy, mucky. There was a lot of dredge and fill in there. They made all those canals. Those are not natural. None of that is natural. Almost no canals in Florida are natural. I came to Sarasota the first time, I think, in 1971. Sarasota is full of canals. They're all man-made. Because if you bought a piece of property, you wanted as many waterfront lots to sell as you could. So that's why you need dredge and fill. Okay, this is popping up to Lake Tarpon. This is Lakeshore Estates, which I think had 507 lots. And, you know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, but it's got a lot of detail. And this is from 1957. That's just, you know, this is the one copy we could find, and somebody wrote some stuff on it. But you see all these canals. This is the canals. This is all dredge and fill. Now, what happened with dredge and fill is there wasn't anybody there were no rules in the county. If you talk to the old developers and people who live there, the county had basically no guidelines. And this was the dredge and fill was destroying the environment very badly. And Governor Collins in 1961 prohibited this in the whole state. No more dredge and fill. That was the end of his term. And when you look closely, some of these cartoons and stuff are very interesting. This is just more of Lakeshore Estates. And you all know where it is now. It's right across from Innisbrook. Some of the early ones showed more sailboats. This one we already got to water skiing, I guess, and fishing. Now the price on the canal, $3,000. On the lakefront, $5,000 for a lot. The house was around $25,000. What's interesting is these were cheaper than the next group we're going to get to, which is Lake Tarpon Mobile Home Village. Also, more than 500 units. If you'll notice, they're on very big lots if you drive up there. The way to go in there now is by the Pancake. Is it called Flapjacks or something? Snappers, yeah, in back of Snappers, that's where it is. And, you know, there's a lot of interesting pictures, but these ended up costing more than the houses down the street at Lake Tarpon Estates. And why did they cost more? Because they built these unbelievable amenities in here. They have a social hall which seats 300 people. They have one of the biggest pools in Pinellas County, and you had to pay for all that. And you'll see in a minute where they changed the prices. See, they changed the price from, it was $3,500 for a lot to $4,500 pretty early on because they just weren't selling. Now they were having a lot of septic problems in here because the reason the lots were so big is because everybody had to have their own septic systems, and then the septic systems still failed. This community today still has their own water treatment plant, but the county has got a backup for it. So as far as I know, they still have their own well source. And this is just, you know, more of what you were getting. This one's 1968. It's from this is a newspaper, the Senior Citizen. This is what the original sign looked like, and I think the county made them take that down and have a smaller one. It's a little hard to see it going by today. And of course, they could sell you the trailer, or you could bring it yourself, or you know, whatever you wanted. It's just more of what it looked like, and you can see by the cars. And you know, you can see there are not a lot of trailers because these sold, all these developments sold very slowly. They had bad real estate sales. Why is that? Because of the septic problems. You know, maybe you wanted to build a house, or maybe you went there on the wrong day and it smelled pretty bad, and then they told you, well, they could sell you the lot, but you couldn't build for 4 years until the public sewer came. Now we're switching back down to the Gulf. This is a current picture of the entrance to Wall Springs Park. This is the pool. Now, this is a great picture, and I don't think we've identified these people from 1949. Mr. Cullen, whose family bought the property in 1948, might be able to tell us who those people are. Now, next to Wall Springs is a trailer park with maybe around 100 trailers. I haven't counted them, called Wall Springs Mobile Home Park. This trailer is probably from the mid-40s. I've talked to a bunch of people, and it's the oldest trailer in there. You have to notice the size of the windows. And the reason it's got that thing on top was to save the top of the trailer. This is the entrance with the windmill. Now, why is a windmill important? Well, if you move down here, where are we going to get your water? You know, it's practically, the trailer park in high tide is almost underwater. It's very low in there. And this trailer park does have a water access, by the way, really nice water access. It's just a couple hundred feet south of Wall Springs Park. Very interesting to drive in there. There are a lot of old trailers. Then next, now we're going, so we've gone from Klosterman to Bay Woods to the trailer park. Then we're getting to Indian Bluff Island. And I didn't put much in there because there's the book that I did about Indian Bluff Island. Now, this is a fascinating house in Indian Bluff Island. This was built in 1962. This was a little tiny addition over here. And there's a family room in back of it, which was the original garage, and then he added a garage. Otherwise, this house has not been touched since 1962. It's exactly as it was. And it's a modest house. It was 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, waterfront. It cost, I have the contract, I think it cost $37,000, including the lot, to build the house in 1962. How much are they trying to sell it for now? Probably $600. 2 doors away, just to show you the difference of how things are changing. Backing up to Crystal Beach is mobile home, 2 mobile home developments. One allows travel trailers for a total of about 350 units. It's called Crystal Bay. And Crystal Bay backs up to Crystal Beach. You see it. Now there's a public ramp next to Crystal Bay, a public boat launching ramp from the county. And I don't have any pictures of that, but I know the man, I'm sorry, I'm back, I'm not to Highland Lakes yet. So I know the man who, he's still alive, who filled in, because where Crystal Bay Mobile Home Park and Travel Trailer Park is, there was nothing but a marsh, a mucky marsh, and it got filled in just as the county was putting in regulations because of Governor Collins. It started getting filled in, and during the process of filling it in, the man who filled it in, who's Norm Cullen, the county said he had to get a permit to fill it in. And somehow he got a permit. I mean, it was against the state law, but he somehow got a county permit. And that's full of canals. It's a very interesting place to drive through. Okay, so then the next, all the developments we've discussed so far are built by small developers. Indian Bluff Island was built from a developer from Alexandria, Virginia. Most of the others were built by people from Michigan. And I sort of skipped over, but in addition to the 2 main developments with the 500 trailers and 500 houses up by Lake Tarpon, there's another 1,500 houses up there in developments, and the developments have no names. And I've gone through and I've knocked on doors and I've talked to people, but they have no names. And some of them were most of them were year-round houses to begin with, or they were just winter people. Okay, Highland Lakes is very important because this is US 19. And this is taken from an aerial view from an airplane in 1973. And the people who got me this are John and Priscilla Chase, who lived here. Their grandfather bought this, John's grandfather bought this grove in 19 22. Just this one grove here, it's 95 acres right in here. And you see what else is here. It's nothing but orange groves all the way. Because that's the Gulf. That's Lake Tarpon. But see, you look how far this first 95 acres was to get over. They weren't advertising access to Lake Tarpon in 1973. I had an early ad and I lost it. But it's nothing but groves and a few lakes. What happened is the Chase story is really interesting. John Chase's grandfather deeded him before he died about 7 acres, and it's still there down in here. But it was 2 miles driving on a 2-lane sand road from 19 to their 7 acres, because they came and built a house when they moved down here, and it was before all this was built. And and John had this. And none of these were. So what happened is, this is your first national developer, U.S. Homes. So as soon as U.S. Homes realized, this is the entrance where you go in now, where the fountains are and everything. And there's some doctor's offices right in here. But none of this was, and it does have 1973 over here. And this was paid for by U.S. Homes. Well, U.S. Homes was a huge national corporation, and they ended up buying almost all the rest of this. They bought more than 1,000 acres in here. And why is it called Highland Lakes? Well, you know, it turns out, John said when his grandfather owned this, that the road was either 8 feet below or above where the houses were going to be. So they either had to bring dirt in or take dirt out. I can't remember which. And all those hills and all those lakes in Highland Lakes, they're all fake. Sometimes we listen to people about these things, and people have very different stories about what happened. But John remembers them digging all these lakes out and everything, because his grandfather particularly left him a plot of land which had a big lake on it. And people don't know what it is. People drive in, it's Dorchester Road, and they look and they see there's a house back in the woods, and the driveway's just grass, and people can't figure out what's going on. Well, that was before Highland Lakes developed, they lived back there. Okay, now this map. Now what happens? We get in after 1973, and I collected all these maps. So again, you can see from basically, 1979 up through 2000. 2005 was the last map put out. It was put out by the Palm Harbor Chamber of Commerce. So all these maps are the giveaway maps from banks and the chamber and stuff. And you can still see that even then there's a lot of area that was not developed. Look at all that blank space. And then as you go through, you're going to see more development. This was given out by Clearwater Federal. And you see how much more, but it's still not developing up at here at all. Same thing, it's getting more and more and more developed. And the way often they did these maps, this is probably a Chamber of Commerce map, because the way they did is they sold ads. And people said it would be interesting to show the ads, but we're trying to show the map. We're trying to focus on, so if you live here now, where there's nothing, then you can explain to your grandchildren, you did live in the middle of nowhere, and then it got developed. Same thing, this is the 84 map, and then this is another one, whatever CNS Bank is. That I found a lady who had a whole bunch of these maps, and when I found her, they were throwing them in the trash the day I got them. And what we need to do to make this history complete is to get somebody to work on the last 40 years, since 1973. Because nothing got built after 1973 without a county permit. There had to be schools, there had to be roads, there had to be public sewer, there had to be water, public water. So everything changed. But you see, it went from being nobody to being a lot of people, 94. And you still see all that white area. Now, we could be a little off on some of these dates because most of these maps were not dated. So we just had to guess. Now this map, this is the last map that we know was produced by the Palm Harbor Chamber of Commerce in 2005. If you really want to understand, and a lot of you are over 50 or 60, etc., if you really want to understand this, you have to look at what happened here in context of Florida history and American history. So, you know, you can know about the Indians and British and Spanish control, slavery, the Civil War, the Roaring Twenties, and all of this starts to fit in. I mean, from what you know from your own reading in your own life and seeing movies and seeing documentaries on television, you have to sort of put it all together with that to get the whole picture. How different and similar was Palm Harbor from the rest of the county? Well, before World War II, the differences were very pronounced. And then after World War II, and by 1973, Palm Harbor was much less unique. I mean, there's a problem which, from my point of view, which still exists in Palm Harbor today, that it's not incorporated. If Palm Harbor had been incorporated, then Tarpon Springs would not have been allowed to steal land on the Palm Harbor side of Klosterman, and that land, in my view, was stolen for the college and the art museum, because supposedly Mr. Billericus, the congressman, and some other people wanted the Tarpon Springs police chief rather than the sheriff to be in charge of law and order. And then figure on the other end, along the causeway and at the corner of Dixie Highway where the new public supermarket is, that land was all originally in Palm Harbor. That got taken by Dunedin. Now, how does that happen? Well, one reason it gets taken, because Palm Harbor didn't have any public and sewer, any sewer or water. Then what happened is that Palm Harbor, that these other places could say, well, if you let us, if we annex that, then we'll give you our public water and sewer. And this happened all over the United States. These changes here are no different than that I came from Annapolis, Maryland. The same thing happened in Annapolis, Maryland. The same thing happened in California. Cities would say, let us annex it, and we'll give you public water and sewer, because they had public water and sewer. The other thing is that, you know, when people first came here, they walked. They came in a wagon with oxen or horses. They came by railroad. They came by car. But remember, interstate highways did not start until 1953. And who was president in 1953? Eisenhower. Eisenhower brought interstate highways. And otherwise, you know, you were driving across the country, it was basically a two-lane road. Some of you may remember that. And the way I was able to find some of these trends to see what was happening is the county assessor's office actually has a list for the whole county, but I just have it for Palm Harbor, of when every single house was built in Palm Harbor from starting in 1900. So you could, there began to be when you started looking at all these, you could see, if you'd get down the names of the streets in certain developments, you could see what happened. I mean, because the county provided, so this information is pretty accurate because it comes from county records. The real focus should be dredge and fill, because that destroyed the Gulf of Mexico. Governor Collins had a lot of names. He called this the destruction and desecration, he called it, of Boca Ciega Bay. But Palm Harbor and Pinellas County isn't special. You can go to Sarasota County, it's all over. You can go to Pasco County, it's all over. Look at Tarpon Springs. It's half of it's dug out. If you look at the old pictures in the Tarpon Springs train station, you can see that.